How the Enabler Pressures You to Stay Silent. Welcome back. I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and this is the Family Roles series. Today's video continues our deep investigation into the role of the enabler within narcissistic family systems. But we're going deeper than observation or description. Today, we're going inside the mechanisms the enabler uses to make you, the survivor, disappear from your own story. This video is called How the Enabler Pressures You to Stay Silent, and it's not just about what they do, it's about how their words, gestures, tones, and values infiltrate your psyche until you begin to suppress your voice all on your own. The enabler doesn't scream. They don't block doors or issue ultimatums. They don't even sound aggressive. What they do is more subtle and in many ways more destructive. They suggest, they correct, they guilt, they imply, they wrap their control inside phrases like, "Can't we just move on?" and "This isn't helping anyone." And they often look like the most composed person in the room while they do it. But their calm is not safety, it's suppression. And the pressure to stay silent often comes coded in family values, emotional guilt, and moral superiority. Let's begin by exploring the foundation of enabler control. Guilt. Guilt-based control is the most effective tool the enabler uses to make you second-guess your voice. When you speak up about abuse, neglect, or dysfunction, the enabler rarely argues the facts. Instead, they question your timing, your tone, your motivation. They shift the focus from what happened to how you're talking about it and who you might be hurting in the process. Suddenly, you're not just someone expressing pain. You're someone accused of causing pain. You're not the victim anymore. You're the threat to family harmony. One of the most common guilt tactics is the idea that you're breaking something by speaking. You'll hear things like, "Why are you trying to tear the family apart?" Or "We were finally doing okay, and now you're bringing this up again?" The implication is that truth-telling is dangerous. That honesty is the enemy of connection. That your desire for acknowledgement is selfish. This creates a psychological reversal where the abuser is seen as fragile, and the person exposing them is seen as aggressive. Guilt works because it's invisible. You don't know you're being manipulated. You just start feeling responsible. Responsible for other people's emotions. Responsible for keeping the peace. Responsible for not upsetting the fragile balance of the system. And once that guilt sets in, silence starts to feel like love, like maturity, like protection. But it's not. It's internalized control. And it's not coming from your values, it's coming from someone else's need for you to stop making things uncomfortable. Shame is the next layer of suppression. If guilt says, "You're hurting others," shame says, "You're bad for bringing it up at all." This is where the enabler shifts from soft suggestion to subtle attack. They'll say things like, "You're being dramatic," "This isn't the time," or "You're not perfect either." Notice the structure of these phrases. None of them address the issue. None of them validate the experience. All of them redirect blame. They shrink your voice by enlarging your flaws. They make the focus your character, not the behavior you're naming. This form of shaming is often delivered with emotional distance. A raised eyebrow, a sigh, a smirk, a slow, quiet phrase that lands like a knife wrapped in silk. "You really need to get over this. We've all moved on. You always bring up the past when things are finally okay." These statements don't sound violent, but they are, because they carry an accusation that you are the problem, that your healing is selfish, that your boundaries are cruel, and that your insistence on truth is dangerous. Over time, this kind of shame doesn't just suppress your words, it fractures your self-concept. You start wondering if you really are too much, if your memories are distorted, if your feelings are inconvenient. You begin to edit yourself not to keep others safe, but to keep yourself from being rejected. And that's what shame does. It turns emotional survival into self-erasure. The next layer of silence reinforcement is the demand for premature forgiveness. In many dysfunctional families, the enabler will pressure you to forgive before you've even had the chance to process what happened. This isn't real forgiveness. This is emotional silencing disguised as healing. It's a demand for you to stop feeling something they don't want to deal with. The enabler may say things like, "They're trying," "They've changed," or "You need to let this go." These phrases position forgiveness as a moral requirement, not a personal choice. They frame continued grief, anger, or hurt as failure. You're not seen as someone who was harmed, you're seen as someone who is holding a grudge. The focus isn't on your need for repair, it's on your failure to move on. And because forgiveness is framed as a spiritual or psychological virtue, your resistance to it is seen as evidence that you're emotionally stuck or broken. This creates a new internal conflict. You want healing. You want peace. But you're being told that healing means forgetting. That peace requires pretending. And that forgiveness means silence. You're now stuck between your integrity and your desire to belong. And for many survivors, that split becomes a long-term wound. You say you've forgiven, but you haven't healed. You smile at gatherings, but you feel sick inside. You're praised for being mature, but you feel invisible. Because what's really being rewarded is your performance of forgiveness, not your reality. Another tool enablers use to pressure silence is patterned language. These are the stock phrases they rely on in moments of tension. They don't debate, they diffuse. They don't investigate, they redirect. The phrases are always familiar, emotionally neutral, and socially acceptable. And that's what makes them so effective. They sound reasonable, but they are anything but neutral. Some of the most common enabler phrases include, let it go. This phrase suggests that holding on to pain is unhealthy, but what it really means is, don't ask for accountability. It doesn't acknowledge the hurt. It simply frames your pain as excess baggage that's getting in the way of everyone else's comfort. They're trying. This phrase makes you feel guilty for needing more than crumbs. It shifts the conversation from what happened to how hard it is for the abuser to change. Your need for honesty is now framed as pressure. Your request for acknowledgement is now interpreted as impatience. You're too sensitive. This one's a classic. It reframes your emotions as overreactions, your boundaries as overkill, your truth as exaggeration. It tells you that the problem isn't what was done, it's that you noticed it too loudly. These phrases work not because they're true, but because they're familiar. They've been used so many times that they sound like common sense, but they are not truth. They are emotional scripts designed to preserve the system. And every time you internalize one, your voice gets a little quieter. Your truth gets a little harder to access, and your reality becomes a little easier to override. The most tragic effect of all these tactics is self-abandonment. This is when the external silencing becomes internalized. You no longer need the enabler to silence you, you do it yourself. You downplay your memories. You avoid hard conversations. You filter your words before anyone else has the chance to judge them. You feel shame just for wanting to be heard. Self-abandonment is not passive, it's a survival strategy. You learned that being real comes at a cost, so you created a false self. A self that smiles, agrees, forgives, and floats above the chaos. A self that asks for nothing, needs nothing, challenges nothing. But underneath that false self is the part of you that never got to speak. The part of you that remembers. The part that's still waiting for someone to say, I believe you. The enabler keeps you from finding that part. Not through violence, but through moral pressure, through emotional redirection, through their desperate need to preserve the story they've told themselves about the family, about the narcissist, and about their own goodness. They are not protecting you. They are protecting the lie. And that's why you feel so alone. Because the person who claims to love you is also the person asking you to disappear. But here's what you must understand. The enabler's silence is not love. Their pressure is not peace. Their performance of unity is not family. And their requests for you to just move on are not about healing. They're about keeping things broken in ways that are familiar and manageable. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them your complicity. You don't owe them the disappearance of your truth. Your voice is not too much. Your memory is not broken. Your grief is not inconvenient. And your insistence on being seen is not a threat. It's a reclamation. The enabler may have trained you to believe that silence is noble. But what they were really saying was, don't make me look at what I allowed. That's not your burden. You're allowed to speak, even when they sigh, even when they shut down, even when they say, this isn't the time. Because if not now, when? The pressure to stay silent will come in waves. Guilt, shame, redirection, moral posturing. But each time you name what happened, each time you refuse to shrink, each time you reject their script, you disrupt a system that has thrived on your erasure. You do not have to make them understand in order to be free. You only have to stop silencing yourself. Hi, I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and what you just watched is part of my signature program, the Chosen One series inside School of Soul. This series is not just a course, it's a blueprint for those who know they were different from the start. The black sheep, the scapegoat, the truth teller, the cycle breaker. Inside, you'll discover the family roles playbook, the golden child, the scapegoat, the enabler, the lost child, and how to finally step out of the part you were cast in without consent. How the black sheep becomes the goat, turning rejection into radical transformation in leadership. How to break generational curses and rewrite ancestral contracts so the pain stops with you. And how to recognize and escape modern forms of spiritual and technological targeting, from gang stalking to synthetic synchronicity. This isn't just about survival. It's about awakening, about reclaiming your voice, your lineage, and your destiny as one of the chosen ones. Click the link below to access the full series now, because the role ends the moment you decide it does, and the real script begins with you.